Okay, so this is going to be a video that I'm pre-recording dealing with part 2 of Franz Kafka's The Metamorphosis. Again, as a reminder, we'll try and keep this to within an hour or less. I will review some of the things that we covered in class, and we covered a lot, and emphasize certain things that maybe we didn't spend enough time on, and just give you a general sense of what's transpiring in part 2, how it relates to part 1. And in anticipation of part 3, the final part, which you should all be reading or have finished certainly by class time. And then we'll be wrapping up Kafka and preparing and moving on towards Melville's Billy Budd. So again, this is meant to complement what transpired in class. All right. By all means, when you watch this video, take notes. If you have questions, write them down and bring them up in class so we can address them together as a unit. And as you saw from the previous videos that I pre-record, I'm going to put the text up on the screen and look at certain passages in detail. Right? And that's going to be the basic approach throughout the semester with these. And as a reminder, when we transition back into the classroom in a little more than a week, I will continue to do these pre-recorded videos. And again, as I've responded to a number of your concerns, if for whatever reasons you are unable to come into the classroom once we have transitioned back into the classroom, things will be set up so that you will be able to be a part of those classes through Zoom. I'm not sure exactly how that's going to be set up, but you should be able to access it, my live class at the college through Zoom, through the Omnivox portal. All right, and once I have all those details, logistics cleared up, obviously I will inform you and we can proceed from there. All right, so let's get right to it. And here we are. So part 2, we remember how part 1 ended with him being, Gregor being herded back into his room. When he awakens the next day, again, what I want you to take note of here is how his change progresses. Always bringing you back to the title, The Metamorphosis, transformation. Gregor's obvious transformation and this battle he's having, internal battle, between his outward appearance that has now been transformed into this giant insect or vermin, beetle, bug, cockroach, whatever it is, versus his human consciousness, right? And it's coupled, right, how he is perceiving himself, that human side, in contrast with his non-human side, and of course, how others are perceiving him and how they're treating him and how they're responding to his more obvious transformation. But we're also attentive to the transformations that the other members of the family are going through. All right, so be attentive to that, and we really start to see that happening here in part 2, which will then all come together in the third part of the story. So little things that to be attentive to here, right? He felt fully rested, right? Again, his consciousness and his rationale in dealing with his situation, seemingly always trying to remain pragmatic, and always seeming to express his concern for his family, Right? This becomes paramount in the story. He is almost making excuses for their behavior, always trying to see their side of things, and always giving them the benefit of the doubt. We see this manifest here in part 2 quite obviously. But he's fully rested, right? And he's feeling good. What he's noticing is that he is hungry. Be it always attentive to imagery, symbols, right? Darkness and light. We see something like electric street lamps, right? That is man-made light, human construct. Note the language, but down below where Gregor was in the dark, he is feeling his way clumsily with his antennae, of which he was now beginning to learn the value. So again, we remember he didn't even know how to walk at first, has those flimsy little legs, but when he falls down on them, he goes, oh, now I understand what they're for. So we have this scene, we talked about it in class, where his sister brings him food, and what she initially brings him is the sweetened milk with little pieces of white bread floating in it, and he's pleased, laughed, because this was something he really enjoyed. We note at this stage his hunger. Be attentive, right, to his hunger and his relationship with food. We know to be attentive to that because it's being emphasized here. And so hungry, his sister brings him the milk that he always loved, but again, a manifestation of his change. The milk did not taste at all nice. This was normally his favorite drink. And his sister had certainly left it there for him because of that, right? So at this stage, it seems that the sister is starting to take care of him, and she's trying to bring him what he would normally like. Of course, we're anticipating, that everyone has changed as a result of Gregor's change to some degree. After this, his inability to appreciate the food or enjoy the food, his curiosity, through the crack of the door. Gregor, remember doors, right? It's a crack in the door at this point, right? Remember the significance of the symbolism of the doors, right? Doors keep people out and keep people in. What would normally happen, right, at this time is not happening. Maybe his father had lost the habit in recent times. Well, things have changed. And he's reflecting here. It was so quiet all around too, even though there must have been somebody in the flat. What a quiet life it is the family lead, said Gregor to himself, and gazing into the darkness, take note of darkness, felt a great pride that he was able to provide a life like that in such a nice home for his sister and parents. So much of Gregor's identity before the transformation, before the metamorphosis, was rooted in his purpose in life, his purpose as he perceived it, which was to take care of his family and give them a good life. But what now if all this peace and wealth and comfort should come to a horrible and frightening end? This is his concern. He seems more concerned for his family than for his own predicament. And he gets agitated, crawling up and down the room. Once during the long evening, the door on one side of the room was open, right? And later on, the door on the other side did the same. So again, we're constantly getting these idea of door, the door opening up to allow for freedom or closing down and curtailing that sense of freedom. And he comments here, right? The previous morning while the doors were locked, everyone wanted to get in there to him. But now that they had opened up one of the doors and the other had clearly been unlocked sometime during the day, no one came. Right? The irony there. He goes in again. There's a lot of him at this point reflecting on his situation, understandably so. Until morning, that gave him plenty of time to think undisturbed about how he would have to rearrange his life. Pragmatism. He's thinking practically. For some reason, the tall, empty room where he was forced to remain made him feel uneasy as he lay there flat on the floor, even though he had been living in it for 5 years. It's the subtlety of his awareness, and we're going to see how that builds. All right, and this, of course, harps us back to part 1, and when he initially wakes up to find himself transformed, and he's just thinking, how am I going to get to work? Right? It's almost like a desperate attempt to rationalize away the magnitude of what has happened to him. He's going under the couch, pressed down on his back a little. He was no longer able to lift his head, but he nonetheless felt immediately at ease. Right? This is when he goes under the couch. Right? Hardly aware of what he was doing other than a slight feeling of shame. Right? Now he can't do what he's been accustomed to, particularly in taking care of his family. He hurries under the couch, and he immediately is at ease. His only regret was that his body was too broad to get it all underneath. Right? The natural habitat for an insect, a cockroach, under the couch, right? And this is now he's discovering, not just, as we'll see, with the under the couch placement of Gregor in terms of hiding so he doesn't offend anyone who may see him, but it's also where he's most comfortable. Spent the whole night there, but he's frequently woke because of this hunger. And it's important. He's hungry at this point. That is a demonstration of he is still very much has this human component to him. But even as he is there ruminating over this, he always led to the same conclusion. For the time being, he must remain calm. He must show patience. And the greatest, this is key here, right? This is what he is focused on. The greatest consideration so that his family could bear the unpleasantness that he, in his present condition, was forced to impose on them. Right? He's thinking of his family, and that he is imposing on them when something has been imposed upon him. We don't know what, right? Remember, that's one of the great issues here that we grapple with. Like, why did this happen to Gregor? But he's not thinking about that. Rather than sitting there, why me? What did I do? He's like, oh my goodness, look what this is going to do to my family. I have to be patient and be always considering what happens to my family. Okay. We have, again, we're seeing now how Greta is taking over this responsibility, something she didn't have in the past, in taking care of Gregor, but she has to come to terms with it as well. When she when she realized, she comes in, but when she did notice him under the couch, she was so shocked that she lost control of herself and slammed the door shut again from the outside. But, right, and this is a testament that this attests to her strength and her will. She seems to regret her behavior and opened the door again straight away and came in on tiptoe, as if entering the room of someone seriously ill or even a stranger. Right? That's very telling. She stole consider him as her brother? Does she recognize that which is still human in him? Or as a stranger? Well, at this point, she's not sure. Huh? He's wondering whether she's going to be able to figure out that he doesn't like the food that he usually likes, and even goes so far, again, thinking of her more than himself. If she doesn't bring him other kinds of food, he would rather go hungry than draw her attention to it. Right? However, his sister did, right? So we get this. His sister noticed the full dish immediately and looked at it and the few drops of milk splash. Remember, she brought the milk in before. She's coming to clean it up. She realizes that he hasn't eaten any of it. And she immediately picked it up. And again, right, she's using a rag, not her bare hands. Gregor is a giant insight here. Gregor was extremely curious as to what she would bring in its place, imagining the wildest possibilities. But he never could have guessed what his sister, and again, when we're getting this narration, we're getting much of it from Gregor's perspective. It's in her goodness. It's being emphasized to us. But we have to watch carefully to see if what Gregor is perceiving as her goodness and her caring behavior is really in sync with what she actually is doing. This becomes particularly relevant when she comes in with the mother shortly to clear out all the space in the room. But we'll see this consistently. You want to be looking for it, how we're getting this perspective from Gregor that, they're doing good things. They're doing, and that matters to him. Because again, that's so much a part of his identity. Human identity is as someone who's taking care of his family. She brings him, we talked about this in class, a whole array of different types of food, because she's picked up on, well, what does he doesn't like the milk, what he used to like. I don't know what he's going to like now because he is different. Spread it out on an old newspaper, right? Because it's not going to be on plates. He can't eat normally anymore. And again, brings old half-eaten vegetables, bones from the evening meal, a few raisins and almonds, okay? Some cheese that Gregor had declared inedible 2 days before, etc., etc. And then we get this again from Gregor's perspective. Then, out of consideration for Gregor's feelings, as she knew that he would not eat in front of her, all right, she hurried out again and even turned the key in the lock so that Gregor would know he could make things as comfortable for himself as he liked. Is that why she leaves? Out of consideration for Gregor? Is that why she locks the door? Out of consideration for Gregor? That's how he's perceiving it. But is she leaving because she can't bear to watch this insect, whatever, eat? And is she locking the door out of consideration for Gregor, who would know he could make things as comfortable for himself as he liked? Or is she locking the door to make sure he doesn't get out? But Gregor certainly has a positive assessment to this. And what does he eat? The cheese. The cheese that he declared inedible 2 days before. Right? So these are the little clues and hints of his transformation that we as readers are finding quite obvious. But Gregor still seems to be a few steps behind us. Perhaps a few steps behind his family in recognizing the magnitude of the change. And the vegetables and the sauce and the fresh foods, he didn't like at all. His sister slowly turned the key to the lock as a sign to him that he should withdraw. Okay, get under the couch. So he hurries back under the couch. But he needed great control to stay there, even for the short time that his sister was in the room, as eating so much food had rounded out his belly. So again, the emphasis on how hungry he is, and he ate a lot. And he watches from under the couch, bulging eyes, half suffocating. She took a broom and swept up the leftovers, mixing them in with the food he had not even touched at all, as if it could not be used anymore. So you see the juxtaposition here. He's saying, oh, it's out of consideration for Gregor, but we're seeing the actions that the sister is engaging in, and we're understanding, yeah, she's going to mix it all together, because once it's been laid out, once Gregor has gotten close to it, whether it's fresh food or whether it's scraps, leftovers, or garbage, once it's been in the presence of Gregor, it's all one and the same. Could not be used anymore. And now we're getting this passage of time. We talked about this in class as well, right? Remember the emphasis in the first part on very specific time sequences, right down to the minute as he's contemplating how he's going to get to work, he's late, and so on. Now we get much vaguer concept of time. This is how Gregor received his food each day now. Once in the morning while his parents and the maid were still sleeping, and the second time after everyone had eaten their meal at midday, as his parents would sleep, and so on. So we're not getting that specificity when it comes to time, and that's going to become noticeable. Gregor's father and mother certainly did not want him to starve either, but perhaps it would have been more than they could stand to have any more experience of his feeding than being told about it, right? He's recognizing slowly but surely that he is repulsive to them. And perhaps the sister wanted to spare them what distress she could, as they were indeed suffering enough, suffering because of him. And this also emphasizes now that the sister, in a sense, is taking over Gregor's role in protecting the parents, which is what Gregor certainly thought he was doing. Get the emphasis again, that reminder that he can't be understood, so he can't express himself. He can't let the family know, hey, I'm in here. So all they have is this giant insect. We are savvy to what is going on inside his mind. The family is not. And Gregor is listening, trying to understand, and as he says, Gregor would sometimes catch a friendly comment, or at least a comment that could be construed as friendly. It's important here, the distinction. Gregor would sometimes catch a friendly comment. Well, at least a comment that could be construed as friendly, depending on how you interpret it. He's enjoyed his dinner today, she might say, when he had diligently cleared away all the food left for him. Of course, the food that was left for him is not really considered food, right? It's scraps, it's cheese that has gone bad. And then note here, or if he left most of it, which slowly became more and more frequent. And she would say, sadly, now everything's just been left there again. So here we're seeing a switch. Remember, we've gone from he's really hungry, eating so much that he can barely fit under the couch. And now he's leaving most of it. He's losing his appetite. Right? Again, part of a process of descent into wherever it is he's descending. We get again him constantly wanting to hear what's going on, desperately wants to be a part of the family. Whenever he heard someone speaking, he would scurry straight to the appropriate door and press his whole body against it. He's desperate to still be part of the family. But of course, the irony there is that how much was he part of the family before his Metamorphosis. Maybe in his mind he was, but it comes back to, again, remember, he'd go to his room and lock the door. That emphasis on the doors. Even this is before he transformed. So was he ever really that much a part of the family other than the provider? And we're getting here as well, right? No one ate very much. Well, we certainly understand perhaps why the family isn't eating. They're trying to cope with this situation. But we know that Gregor was very hungry, and now he's losing his appetite too. And what is the significance? Well, certainly very much, food consumption is the fuel that all living beings need in order to live. Right? So we're seeing everyone here losing seemingly a bit of that desire. Why the family versus why Gregor? Especially again because Gregor was so hungry at first. Get this lethargy here. No one drank very much either. His sister would sometimes ask his father whether he would like a beer, hoping for a chance to go fetch it herself. No, she wants to take care. She wants to be the caretaker. But the father's not interested. Then they talk about the money. And this, of course, is quite revealing. I'm not going to go into this in too great detail because we talked about it in class. The father had explained to Gregor's mother and sister that what their finances and prospects were, the collapse from 5 years earlier. What he heard his father say was some of the first good news that Gregor had heard since he had first been incarcerated in his room. So a couple of things here. Good news. Right? He's going to interpret the fact that his father actually has some money as good news, even though, as we discussed in class, father never told Gregor that there was any extra money, and Gregor is working his fingers to the bone to supply the money. But Gregor, again, sees it as good news. But he also hears this idea of incarcerated in his room. He's a prisoner in his room. Their business misfortune had reduced the family to a state of total despair. And Gregor's only concern at that time had been to arrange things so that they could all forget about it as quickly as possible. So then he started working especially hard. Right? This relates to what we were discussing earlier about how when the chief clerk is chastising him, suggesting that he's not a good worker. Started working especially hard with a fiery vigor that raised him from a junior salesman to a traveling representative almost overnight. That is indicative that he is a hard worker and was achieving success, bringing with it the chance to earn money in quite different ways. Gregor converted his success at work straight into cash that he could lay on the table at home for the benefit of his astonished and delighted family. Okay? Now that might have been at the beginning, but we certainly don't get the sense from what we've read up to this point that they were expressing to Gregor any kind of astonishment or delight in the fact that he was doing all the work to bring in money. They had been good times and they had come again, at least not with the same splendor, even though Gregor had later earned so much that he was in a position to bear the cost of the whole family. They took the money with gratitude. Okay, we haven't seen that, but that's certainly okay. And he was glad to provide it, although there was no longer much warm affection given in return. Little hints for us to observe. All this praise, they were astonished, they were delighted, and so on. But then we're getting here revealed to us, but now they're not really showing much affection in return. Now they're starting to take it for granted. Gregor only remained close to his sister now. Right? So that something we've already suspected based on the information we've seen in the text, something that now is being confirmed. Right? And now that could go a long ways into explaining why the sister is taking the role of caregiver to Gregor. We have this bit with the violin. I've told you to be attentive to the music and the violin, especially when we get into the third part, and be thinking about what does music symbolize in terms of human beings, right? It seems to be the kinds of responses that Gregor discusses in relation to the music is something that is particularly human. And he has planned to send her to the conservatory next year, even though it would cause great expense that would have to be made up for in some other way, but he's going to do it because he recognizes the importance this is for his sister, or at least he believes it's important for his sister, and he's going to make the grand announcement of it on Christmas Day. So Christmas Day, good time to make an announcement, but it's also, I think I've mentioned this to you a couple of times, that be attentive to any kind of references to religion. You're going to see in part 3 where, because we're looking for explanations here. Why is this happening to Gregor? Is this God's will? Things like that. But we're just getting little droplets of hints here. And Christmas Day is one of them, because Christmas Day, well, yes, we associate it with giving gifts and all that. Great time to announce that I'm going to send you to the conservatory. But it's also Christmas, a very religious holiday, right? Gregor's mother, noting here, because we're trying to get a better grasp of, the other members of the family and who they are. Gregor's mother did not understand everything the first time. So we've gotten this sense with the mother. And we're going to see this really come into play, and we're getting set up for it here, when she and Greta are going to be removing the furniture and how she responds to that. And here we learn that, and again, I'm not going to go into this too much because we covered this in class, that despite all their misfortunes, there was still some money available from the old days. Now, this is significant. I want to make sure this is clear. I don't know if I made it as clear as possible in class. There was still some money available from the old days. Well, Gregor was certainly under the impression that there was nothing left from the old days. That's why he had to work so hard. Well, there was money left from the old days. Father didn't tell Gregor that. It was not a lot, but it had not been touched in the meantime, and some interest had accumulated. Besides that, they had not been using all the money that Gregor had been bringing home every month, keeping only a little for himself, so that too had been accumulating. How does Gregor respond to this? Behind the door, Gregor nodded with enthusiasm and his pleasure at this unexpected thrift and caution. Oh, what a wonderful thing. Good news. All right. Some first good news Gregor had heard since he had first been incarcerated in his room. But as we discussed in class, wait a minute here. Yeah, it is good news, I suppose, under the circumstances, but the father was deceiving Gregor. Not appreciating Gregor, and Gregor is working his fingers to the bone, and their father is put aside money. He could actually have used this surplus money to reduce his father's debt to his boss, and the day when he could have, and the day he could have freed himself from that job would have come much closer. But now it was certainly better the way his father had done things. Well, only can be possibly conceived of or perceived as better because of Gregor's predicament, which no one could have foreseen. So it's this rationalization. Oh, this is a good thing. Whereas what we have to ask ourselves, what would have Gregor's reaction been if he hadn't been transformed into a giant insect and he found this out weeks ago? Would have he still been saying, oh, this is a good thing? Should he be saying this is a good thing? Or should he be responding saying, hey, you could have used that money to pay off your debt that I'm paying off for you so I could get out of this miserable job? This money, however, was certainly not enough to enable the family to live off the interest, but it was enough to maintain them for perhaps 1 or 2 years. Sounds like a fairly substantial amount of money. That's to say it was money that should not really be touched but set aside for emergencies. Money to live on had to be earned, but a chunk of this money had been earned by Gregor, using up all the money that Gregor had been bringing home. They had not been using up that money. Again, we're getting Gregor's perspective here, and again, it's waffling. Learning more about Greta, well, the mother, we know, suffers from asthma. Would his sister have to go and earn money? He's concerned now. You know, they've only got enough for 2 or 3 years. So what's that mean? What's going to happen to my sister, who is 17 years old? Her life up till then had been very enviable, consisting of wearing nice clothes, sleeping late, helping out in the business, joining in with a few modest pleasures, and most of all, playing the violin, a fairly frivolous life. But whenever they're talking about the need to earn money, because the father is saying, yes, we have this, but we have to earn money. Now he's being practical. Maybe that was his intention all along, but it probably should have been an intention that he shared with Gregor, because one of the things we have to always be considering is that part of the reason that Gregor has been transformed into this giant beetle was because of the nature of his life. The life he had sacrificed socially, economically, in order to take care of his family. Okay, and as he became quite hot in shame with regret, his shame and regret here is that he can no longer do and help the family. But we can see that the father seems to be quite capable of hoarding money, and as we find out shortly, quite capable of going to work. Gregor didn't seem to acknowledge that. And we have to ask ourselves as well, what was Gregor that naive? What was Gregor, his inability to really understand what his family, or certainly his father, was capable of? Remember, he describes the father as someone he can't work, he's gotten old, he's gotten fat, and so on. We find fairly quickly that the father is more than capable of working, and he's certainly able to think and plan and strategize, because that's what him keeping the money was all about. Of course, when we see something like the window and what that represents, right? The window out to the other world, climbing up onto the sill, propped up on the chair, leaning out the window to stare out of it. He had used to feel a great sense of freedom from doing this, but doing it now was obviously something more remembered than experienced. All right. Again, this is furthering the process of decline. And as he's looking and musing over this, he could have thought that he was looking out the window at a barren waste where the gray sky and the gray earth mingled inseparably. Important to remember this, with this description of gray sky, gray earth, barren wasteland. And keep that in mind. This is reflecting not just the environment, but reflecting the inner soul, if you will, of Gregor and arguably his family. This is what their world is now. It's gray. It's like a wasteland. Keep that in mind when we get to part 3 and what transpires there. And look for other descriptions of the environment and see how they may conform to or contrast with what's being described here. His sister naturally tried as far as possible to pretend there was nothing burdensome about it. And the longer went on, of course, it became very unpleasant for him now whenever she entered the room. No sooner had she come in than she would quickly close the door as a precaution so that no one would have to suffer the view into Gregor's room. Then she would go straight to the window and pull it hurriedly open, almost as if she were suffocating. Let's get some air, right? Again, this descent into now the place is starting to smell. It's rotting away as Gregor is seemingly going through a rotting process, a demise. She would alarm Gregor twice a day with this running about and noise making. He would stay under the couch shivering the whole while, knowing full well that she would certainly have liked to spare him this ordeal. Really? But it was impossible for her to be in the same room with him with the windows closed. So even here you can see she has to open the window. She is now, we're seeing again the process, can't bear to be in there without opening the windows to get some kind of air in. But he's still defending her. She would certainly have liked to spare him this. All right. So one day, about a month after Gregor's transformation, when his sister had no longer any particular reason to be shocked at his appearance, she came into the room a little earlier than usual and found him still staring out the window. It's a very striking image, right? That he's going to the window, staring out, longing for what is out there. Life is out there, maybe gray, but it's in contrast to his incarceration in this room, this prison that is his room. The usual, and just where he would be most horrible. In itself, his sister's not coming into the room would have been no surprise for Gregor, as it would have been very difficult for her to immediately open the window while he was still there. But not only did she not come in, she went straight back and closed the door behind her. A stranger would have thought he had threatened her and tried to bite her. Again, now we're getting this back and forth. Now we're getting glimpses from Gregor's perspective of his awareness, right? It's the narrator, but we're sensing it's Gregor's perspective. That is he slowly starting to realize, it's that, they're not that caring about him. Is it something he can't bear to let go of? This idea, this perception, this belief that his sister is doing everything out of goodness, would do it any other way if it was at all possible to spare Gregor? Is anyone thinking about what Gregor is going through? He's certainly thinking about what the family is going through, but is anyone thinking about what Gregor is going through? And should they, when they can't even communicate with him? From their perspective, is they're just seeing a giant insect there. Should they care about it? Are we surprised that they're caring about it and not doing something about it for as long as they have? Do they still think it's Gregor in there? It made him realize that she still found his appearance unbearable. One day, in order to spare her even this slight, he spent 4 hours carrying the bed sheet over to the couch on his back and arranged it so that he was completely covered and his sister would not be able to see him even if she bent down. process, right? He's hiding under the couch. You can just see a little of him. Now he is completely covering himself up to spare his sister, seemingly so. Gregor even thought he glimpsed a look of gratitude one time when he carefully looked out from under the sheet to see how his sister liked the new arrangement. He thought, but he can't be sure. For the first 14 days, okay, again, we're being attentive to the time, Gregor's parents could not bring themselves to come into the room. He would often hear them say how they appreciated all the new work his sister was doing, even though before they had seen her as a girl who was somewhat useless and frequently been annoyed with her. Ah, remember? Transformations, metamorphosis. Here we're getting a clear and precise statement regarding how Gregor's sister is changing. Important to know, because when we get to the end of the story, we're going to be assessing the types of changes that everyone's going through. His mother also wanted to go in and visit Gregor relatively soon, but his father and sister at first persuaded her against it, right? And now we're getting this maternal love that the mother has for Gregor. And something very important here, when she says, "Let me go and see Gregor. He is my unfortunate son. Can't you understand? I have to see him." She is the only one who is emphatically and precisely referring to him by name and as her son. Unfortunate son, but son nonetheless. And I have to see him. She won't let go. Right? And we're going to see when they're clearing out all the stuff in the room that she doesn't want to clear that stuff out in anticipating for when he comes back. We don't get that from the father, certainly, and we don't really get it from Greta either. And we see the mother like this, and we're going, well, that's a mother, right? That maternal instinct. But at the same time, are we perhaps reacting a bit as we might figure the Greta's reacting, which is, come on, he's not coming back. Look, he's a giant beetle. And Gregor would think to himself, maybe it would be better if his mother, came in, not every day, of course, but one day a week, perhaps. She could understand everything much better than his sister, who, for all her courage, was still just a child, after all. Really might not have an adult's appreciation of the burdensome job she had taken on. It's interesting, right? So Gregor is still seeing her as a child, but she is maturing fast out of necessity. Gregor's predicament has ruptured this family and has pushed them into taking action that they presumably would not be taking or doing if Gregor was still just hopping on that train at 5 in the morning and working. All right. So now we come up to the scene when they come to clear out the room, right? Gregor's wish to see his mother was soon realized. We've already, we talked about in class how he's now taken up the habit of crawling on the walls and the ceilings. A further example of his metamorphosis progressing into a more and more insect-like state as he becomes familiar with his capabilities as an insect. Remember the antenna and so on. This is now becoming how he functions. His food stopped giving him any pleasure at all. And to entertain himself, he got into the habit of crawling up and down the walls and the ceiling. where he could breathe more freely. His body had a light swing to it up there, relaxed and most happy. The entertainment, the joy, the only entertainment and joy he gets is when he is behaving and acting out in this insect body, not trying to be human physically in any case. Very soon his sister noticed Red's new way of entertaining himself. He had, after all, left traces of the adhesive from his feet as he crawled about, and got it into her head to make it, as easy as possible for him by removing the furniture that got in his way. So his sister had no choice but to choose some time when Gregor's father was not there to fetch his mother to help her, right? Because the maid won't help. The father certainly wouldn't help. As she approached the room, Gregor could hear his mother express her joy. She's finally going to see him. So then everything really looked as if it had been through my chance. Okay, let's move on. We covered all this, most of this in class. We get the emphasis here, his sister always taking on the heaviest part of the work for herself and ignoring her mother's warnings that she would strain herself. So again, when we look at the details, the responsibility that the sister is taking on upon herself, and also very importantly, in contrast to what we have been led to believe she was like before the transformation, before the metamorphosis, is the sister is taking control, and not just taking control by caretaking for Gregor, but now is the one who makes the decisions. Certainly when it's a decision that involves her mother, ignoring her mother's warnings that she would strain herself. She thought just the sight of the bare walls saddened her right to her heart. And why wouldn't Gregor feel the same way about it? He'd been used to his furniture in this room for a long time, and it would make him feel abandoned to be in an empty room like that. Right? The mother is the one who is recognizing the problems associated with taking away these symbols, objects of Gregor's human dimension. Right? It's a means by which, and a process by which Greta is removing Gregor from her life, the life of the family. Yes, on the one hand, she's doing it to make things easier for Gregor, but this is Gregor's perspective. Right? We saw this earlier. You know, she's doing this to be nice to me, or is she doing this because she can't stand the sight of him? The mother still has that sense of there's Gregor's there. We're finding that Greta less and less sees anything human here. You know, get all this stuff out so this bug can crawl along the walls. Perhaps there's still a sense of compassion there, that this will make his life better, but it's very ambiguous at this point. And by taking the furniture away, won't it seem like we're showing that we're giving up all hope of improvement and we're abandoning him to cope for himself? This is the mother. I think it's best to leave the room exactly the way it was before, so that when Gregor comes back to us, again, he'll find everything unchanged. And he'll be able to forget the time in between all the easier. It's, when we're seeing this and hearing this from the mother, it really is in contrast and heightening to a certain degree Greta's actions, where we've had this, is she doing it because she cares about Gregor, or is she doing it because she can't stand the sight of Gregor? And we're not sure, right, up until this point. You know, there's that ambiguity, as I said. But then when we see the mother who, you know, really hits the nail on the head, and since we know as readers, unlike the family, that Gregor is very human inside, still. You know, that which does lend itself to the possibility that he could come back. This seems, you know, compassionate and the right thing. And it's the first time that now, well, not the first time, but it's more of an emphasis on us questioning Greta's motivations here. In terms of, is she doing this to benefit Gregor? There's no doubt it started that way. No doubt it started with her wanting to help Gregor. But note how the process, the subtlety of the movement, and now it's really contrasted with what the mother says here, which puts us in a position of going, you know, what is Greta's motivation here? All right, so hearing these words from his mother made Gregor realize that the lack of any direct human communication, along with the monotonous life led by the family during these 2 months, must have made him confused. He could think of no other way of explaining to himself why he had seriously wanted his room emptied out. Right now, remember this we talked about, this is the shift. Right? Hearing his mother's words, expressing her, maintaining her recognition of Gregor as a human being, has sparked something in Gregor, saying, well, wait a minute, yes, maybe I don't want my room. Because at first he was saying, oh, she's doing me a favor, she's clearing out everything here so I can run around the walls. But that's not who I am. Wait a minute. And it's the mother and the mother's words that light this light for Gregor. He could think of no other way of explaining to himself why he had seriously wanted the room emptied out. Had he really wanted to transform his room into a cave? A warm room fitted out with the nice furniture he inherited? That would have let him crawl around unimpeded in any direction, but it would also have let him quickly forget his past and when he had still been human. Almost as if Gregor was on the brink of giving up that humanness. His mother's words bring him back. But, you know, it's still, is he still human? He still has a consciousness that can think in human terms. But now he's not even eating. Remember, we talked about in class, he can't even see properly anymore. He is diminishing. He is fading. His humanity, his humanness is dissipating. And then the mother, through her maternal instincts and love, brings him back and go, wait a minute. Nothing should be removed. Everything had to stay. His sister, unfortunately, did not agree. She had become used to the idea, not without reason, that she was Gregor's spokesman, or spokeswoman, to his parents about the things that concerned him. She has taken charge. Big change in Greta. From that, you know, sweet little innocent girl at the beginning weeping behind the door to now a much stronger, empowered decision maker, directly as a result of Gregor's transformation. This meant that his mother's advice now was sufficient reason for her to insist on removing not only the chest of drawers in the desk, as she had thought at first, but all the furniture apart from the all-important couch. Note, the decision was just to remove some of the furniture after this confrontation with the mother, where Greta needs to emphasize the fact that she is the spokesperson. She's the one in charge. Now she's going to make even a greater executive decision. And we're going to remove everything, except for the couch, of course. Now, is she leaving the couch there because Gregor likes to go under the couch, or is she leaving the couch there because we need to make sure that Gregor hides so we don't have to see him? What's the next step? You remove all the furniture. reduce this to a cave, as Gregor describes it, with just the couch there, what's going to happen next in terms of, you know, or certainly Greta's behavior towards Gregor. It was more than childish perversity, of course, or the unexpected confidence she had recently acquired that made her insist. She had indeed noticed that Gregor needed a lot of room to crawl about in, whereas the furniture, as far as anyone could see, was of no use to him at all. But note here, girls of that age, though, do become enthusiastic about things and feel they must get their way whenever they can. So on the one hand, she has been empowered with confidence and purpose, a suggestion of maturity, but now it's being undercut. Well, you know, she's just being, you know, stamping her feet because they have to get their way whenever they can. Which is it? Well, just like with Gregor, who is back and forth as he's going through this transformation, we're seeing Greta having the same thing. On the one hand, it's a girlish behavior. On the other hand, it's a mature behavior. All right? One day she's stamping her feet. The next, she's taking charge and she's empowered. Perhaps this is what tempted Greta to make Gregor's situation seem even more shocking than it was, so that she could do even more for him. Suggesting that she likes having purpose and responsibility. Well, that's a sign of maturity. That's something that she would not be doing if it wasn't for Gregor's transformation. All right, we'll start wrapping this up. We talked about how he plasters himself up against that picture, which we still don't know what the significance of that picture is, other than it certainly has great value to Gregor. Great value vis-a-vis his sense of his humanness. Right? We talked about that scene and everything else about how bizarre it is, how absurd it is, how disturbing it is, how comical it is in a very dark way. And again, we see again, because we didn't look at the text itself, but I'll just highlight a few things that really is a reflection of Gregor's mood and leading to his actions and behavior. All these things make him feel as if he were being assailed from all sides. Remember, it's the first time that he rebels, first time he tries to fight back. They were emptying his room out, taking away everything that was dear to him. We saw this. He sallied, changed direction 4 times, not knowing what he should say first before his attention was suddenly caught by the picture on the wall. Okay, but it's a pivotal moment. It's the first time he stands up to Greta. He's in defiance to Greta. He seems genuinely angry with Greta. He seems to be wanting to scream out, hey, stop it. I'm here. Don't treat me like an insect. Can we fault Greta for treating him as such? Because this is all she can perceive of him. The mother is what sparks all this, because the mother, through her maternal instincts, can still see or sense, or maybe it's just hope, that Gregor is still there. And we saw here, right? He would rather jump at Greta's face. All right, we covered this in a fair amount of detail, what transpires next, right? This was the first word she had spoken to him directly since his transformation. That's quite telling. Right? Gregor, shouted his sister, glowering at him and shaking her fist. That was the first word she had spoken directly to him. It's an acknowledgement that it's still Gregor there. But it's the first time she's acknowledging it, and she's only acknowledging it in this time of deep crisis. Again, showing this back and forth, treating him like an insect. And yet at this moment, calling him by his name, showing the turmoil, representing the turmoil within her, as we're seeing the turmoil in Gregor as he battles between this human and non-human. We're seeing this turmoil perhaps in Greta, who is battling between what she was and what she's becoming, as is Gregor. Wanted to advise his sister like in the old days. This whole unfolding scene, more injuries. He fell down into the middle of the dinner table. He's wreaking havoc. And his father comes home. And just as I expected, said his father, just as I always said, but you woman wouldn't listen, would you? And this is important because as we discussed, and I'll wrap it up here, is now how the father responds, and because I'm going to come back to this as a segue into part 3, revisit this one more time before we get into the details of part 3. But we're seeing here now the father who at the beginning was, this lazy, overweight, do nothing type of person. Now he's also being transformed because now he's taking charge. He's got a job. Right? And yes, you wouldn't listen to me. Well, now you better listen because I was right all along. So his sense of authority, his sense of his position vis-a-vis the family as being the head of the family, so to speak, seems to be returning. Not to the benefit of Gregor, but certainly as a direct result of what's happened to Gregor. That's important to remember. He really had not imagined his father the way he stood there now of late with his new habit of crawling about. He had neglected to pay attention to what was going on the rest of the flat the way he had done before. Further example of Gregor falling further and further away. This is a bit of a surprise. He hasn't been up at the door listening to everything now for the last bit. Remember, 2 months has transpired. The father is standing up straight enough now, dressed in a smart blue uniform with gold buttons, the sort worn by employees at a banking institute. He's fresh and alert, in utter contrast to what he used to be like. Transformation, metamorphosis. We've seen it. We spent a lot of time discussing it in Greta. And now, because we haven't seen much of the father, when the father appears at the end of part 2, we're seeing that he's been transformed as well. And in both cases, the transformation, while we may not be pleased with their attitude towards Gregor, is a demonstration of empowerment. Something that wasn't there before. And authority. And purpose, which wasn't there before. Gregor had it, but the rest of the family didn't. Now they seem to be getting it at the expense of Gregor. All right, they do their little dancing around here, and then, of course, the father bombards him with the apples. And I ask you to think about what could be significant about the apples. We touched on that. We're going to come back to it. But note, right, lodged in his back, Gregor wanted to drag himself away as if he could remove the surprising and incredible pain by changing his position. But he felt as if nailed to the spot and spread himself out. All senses of confusion. What could be the possible significance of being nailed? I think we touched on this. And now spread out, right? Nailed, spread out. Okay? And then this incredible image. which again we'll look at, but think about it again with the hints of what's the apple potentially signifying this being nailed and spread out, that Greta and the father have now become more empowered with purpose as a result of the demise of Gregor, as a result of what Gregor has had to sacrifice. They have found a new life. She pushed herself to his father, her arms around him, uniting herself with him totally. The mother, right, the last one to defend him. But now Gregor lost his ability to see anything. Her hands behind her father's head, begging him to spare Gregor's life. But she has been uniting herself with him totally. But that image of her begging for his life, it's extraordinary. And note where it comes right before we're going to segue into part 3. She's uniting herself with him totally, but she's begging for Gregor's life, fearing that Gregor will be killed by the father, who's throwing apples, one that lodged into Gregor's back, and Gregor feels as if he's been nailed, spread out. So, transformations. Now we're seeing it in the family members, as well as in Gregor, as Gregor moves in one direction away from his humanness, seemingly. We see the sister and the father finding purpose, direction, strength. But can they have that with Gregor here? It seems that only with Gregor out can they find what they need. Do they need that? And is it going to come at the expense of Gregor? Think about all the implications. I've been very cryptic here at the end because I want you to be thinking about this and putting those pieces together as a possible interpretation of what's going to happen in Act 3. All right. There you go. So read through Act 3. We're going to finish up with the Metamorphosis, our next class. And look to put things together here now. Come with your questions, your observations, and let's see where this takes us as we make our final analysis of this incredible story.